This is the Boss PW-2 power driver, an overdrive distortion pedal from the mid-90s, and possibly Boss's lowest selling foot pedal, or worst sounding pedal, depending on what you read on the internet. It's definitely an unusual one. Rather than having a more obvious tone control, it features dials for fat and muscle. The manual is not particularly helpful here. As always, it can be powered by an external power supply or a 9-volt battery, which in my case, the battery looks just like a little version of the pedal itself. For me, the story of the PW-2 goes back to my first outplay guitar and first Boss pedal I got, which was a DS1. And with it, there was this fold out poster of all the catalogue of pedals, and this one was in top right corner, and it was just a slightly different. I liked the shade of it, I liked the colour of it, compared to the more obvious orange of the DS1, the more obvious yellow of the overdrives. This was a sort of odd in between thing, and it was still just a bit of a mystery. What did the fat and muscle mean? In a sense, that kind of makes this pedal a little bit before its time. Around the same time as the PW-2, Boss also produced the XT2 Distortion, which featured controls for contour and punch, along with even worse descriptions in the manual. I mean, the punch control controls punch and makes it punchier. That's fantastic. But within a decade, it became a lot more acceptable to have these semantic audio descriptors. Wave's JJP series of plugins were notable examples here, featuring punch, edge, warm, magic, attitude, and girth. And now it's fairly common to see the likes of tight, deep, skin, meat, reaction, and pizza? Okay. How well did this translate? Not very well, I'd imagine. Made in Taiwan. You know, was that what they were thinking? Was that the word that they were thinking of? Muscle? Fat? Yeah, I mean, this pedal, it's fat with an F, not a PH. If it's PH fat you're after, the Keeley Oxblood has a switch for that. But this can definitely get you a fat, muscular tone, or a tone that is lacking in fat and muscle. Does it really deserve that reputation of worst sounding Boss pedal? You know, poorly marketed gamble of the Boss pedal is not quite as catchy, not quite as clickbaity. Let's find out with the most neutral setup I can find, a Boss Katana 50 with everything at more or less 12 o'clock, and an SM57. Let's turn that on. Everything at 12 o'clock. If it sounds like either the microphone or the interface is clipping, no, that's just the pedal. That's just what it sounds like. So if we turn that gain all the way down, you actually get something quite mild. So there becomes that little point there at the end when it's fading out. All the distortion just kind of fades away. Once the drive goes just a little bit above the minimum, it becomes quite apparent straight away. So let's set it there. Let's set it there at the 9 o'clock level. Looking at the pedal and reading the manual, it's not clear at all what the fat and muscle controls do, but you have to do a bit of experimenting to find out. I've set up a little audio test bench here in the MATLAB programming environment. It's just sending a signal, like white noise, out of an audio interface and into the pedal, and then recording the signal that comes back in and plotting the frequency response. This will show the effect of the fat and muscle controls on the tone. If instead of using white noise you use just a single test tone, then you can measure the effect of the distortion itself. With muscle on maximum, there's about 12 dB boost, close to 1 kilohertz, but that decreases very rapidly to about 5 or 6 dB when the dial is turned back just a little bit. If it looks like the graph is taking a while to respond, that's just because it's averaging over a number of measurements to give a smoother curve. It's not that the pedal takes time to respond. And the same at the minimum. The control is quite severe at its extremes. but between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, it's making much smaller changes to the tone. It's quite subtle. Right at the maximum amount, it starts to get a bit quacky. And similar when it's being reduced. A huge amount of mid-range now just taken out right at the bottom of that control. The fat control works in pretty much the same fashion, but at a lower frequency, somewhere around 100 to 120 Hz. So unusually for a distortion pedal, there's no way to directly adjust the treble frequencies. This makes this pedal an interesting case of it using psychoacoustics in its marketing. Like, if you have a small amp, it will sound bigger if you boost low frequencies, and especially if we label that control with a word like fat. So let's sweep through the fat control. That's the maximum there, maximum fatness. And as you sweep the fat control down, you get less low frequency. At its minimum, you almost get that sort of small speaker radio sound. So in the extreme setting of turning up the fat, turning down the muscle, the inverse of that, if we turn down the fat and turn up the muscle, and this is all with the gain on quite low, on 9 o'clock. You can see how this pedal has a reputation for being difficult to get a good sound out of. The clipping is asymmetric in that the top of the waveform is clipped before the bottom part of the waveform. Even at very low drive, we see the added harmonic distortion. Let's turn down the level a bit first, and then increase the drive. You see the added harmonics increasing and the waveform becoming more and more like a square wave. Importantly though, the proportions of the added harmonics also change, meaning that the character and tone of distortion changes quite a bit as the drive is increased. Even just setting fat and muscle at neutral and turning up the gain to full, we're starting to get into the realm of fuzz. But the nice thing there is that if you turn the volume control all the way back, you can still get it quite clean. Quite a lot of range you can get out of this pedal.
Later.
Oh, look at how dusty this guitar is. Look at how dusty this guitar is. Let's make it as fuzzy as we can.
moments later.
But maybe it's not a guitar pedal, maybe it's a bass pedal. For this now, we're going to have to sort of skip the amp and go straight to the DI sound and put on a cabinet simulation. So again, we'll start with pretty much everything at 12 o'clock. And you get some interesting effects if you turn that most all the way up, because that's pretty much a peak at around 1 kilohertz. And that's a frequency that you would often accentuate to get the sound of a pick. If you don't like mid-range in your bass, you simply just take out that frequency. And if we dare turn up the gain, so there you have it. That is the Boss PW-2 power driver. According to the internet, the worst sounding Boss pedal. If you play this with humbucker pickups, more high output pickups, then even at the lowest gain setting, you're still going to have a lot of gain. So yeah, in a sense, it's a case of either use it very sparingly, very carefully, or just go all out with it. I mean, I do recommend picking one up if you can find one cheaply. I found this one relatively cheaply. I think it's definitely worth trying out. And if it suits your style and if you can get tones out of it that are interesting, definitely go for it. Especially if you're a bass player and you like overdriven bass sounds, I think this is a really good one. If you happen to be in a scenario where you're working with 2 amps, you can definitely keep one of the amps clean and put this on your more distorted amp. Yeah, it's good fun. It's a good fun pedal.